morning to inquire about the power that heals the body. To understand a little more of what faith is. And I'd like to share with you a dear little story that we heard in California about a little boy who had a great deal of faith. If we all had faith like that. He heard his mother and father talking about financial matters. They were in financial straits. They needed money. They said if they had only $100, it would help them out. So in his trusting way, he thought all he had to do was write and tell God about it. And he knew that the answer would come. So he wrote the little letter, printed it laboriously with his stub of a pencil, put his name and his address at the bottom, stuck it in the letterbox, and of course it went to the dead letter office. They opened it there and read it, and they said, oh, what a shame, a child with faith like that, knowing that God will send what they need. Too bad to throw it in the wastebasket. So one said to the other, what should we do with it? The suggestion was made, send it to the president, send it over to the White House. The president's secretaries read it, and they too said, what a shame. What shall we do with it? So the suggestion was made to send it to give it to the president. And after he had read it, he said to one of the secretaries, send the lad a $5 check. They sent it on. He received it. He took it proudly to his father. His father said, well, that will help. It isn't very much. He said, how much is it? $5. His little face fell. He didn't say anything. He went back and sat down and wrote a letter again to God. Dear God, I'm so thankful and grateful that you heard and you answered. But next time, dear God, when I send for $100, please don't send it through the White House. They took out $95. You see, if when our answers come, beloved, we could be like that, we could know that God has answered, but that something has interfered with the answer. Some mishap has come. Someone hasn't done what they're supposed to do. There's a great lesson in the mouths of babes. They listen to the children. They have a beautiful faith. And it's that kind of faith that the Master wished for us, that we could be like little children, eager in our expectancy, wide-eyed in the wonder of the things which the Lord has prepared for those who love him, with a simplicity that is yet full of wisdom, because he said to them, be as wise as serpents, be as gentle as doves. It's a marvelous combination to come up over all of your erudition and learning, to come beyond the intellect into the world of pure knowing, because things happen when we rise above both body and mind into that world of feeling, which is the world of spirit. In talking to you this morning about what actually heals the body, we bring to you the questions which we ourselves asked. We had to go through every step of this, every line, because we were making a tremendous move. We were moving out of materia medica, out of the world of science. We were leaving all our colleagues, all our classmates, our friends, our associates. And it was not an easy thing to do. And they pled with us in the beginning, don't leave the profession. Try to do it within the profession. You could always use prayer. Well, they were right. We could. But there was still something that bound us. We couldn't divide the allegiance. We found pretty soon that we had to answer this question, what is it that really heals you? When you go to the doctor and he gives you a prescription, you go down and have it filled. What is in that prescription? What are in those drugs that can heal you? We have today, as I have told you, moved out of the world of the older drastic medicines into the world of natural and native remedies. Very seldom today you find the doctor's prescriptions for the old types of drugs. Once in a while the strychnine for support of the heart. Once in a while the atropine, the belladonna. The need of sedatives to release pain. But by and large, the work of the physician today is to supplement the body, to find its needs, and to help it by supplying what it fails to receive through the food. If it doesn't get enough vitamins, the vitamins can be supplied. The minerals that are necessary, if the body is not able to assimilate, you can give the minerals. You can give the gland extract, which the body should be making and can't, for some reason or another. You can supply the chlorophyll, the green coloring matter of plants. You can supply the enzymes, which activate the function of other organs. You can regulate diets. You can make all sorts of tests for allergies. Now, these things are not whipping or forcing the body. They are supplying something which it needs. That we can understand. That is rather simple. But what was it in the older method of drugs that could heal? Well, there was a life principle in that drug that was characteristic of the drug itself. Strychnine wouldn't do what belladonna would do. Belladonna couldn't do the job of morphine. A strong purgative would not do the task of a sedative. What was that element? It was the God element, the life element of the drug within it that characterized it. And when that was introduced into the body, the recuperative power, the intelligence within the body, the God intelligence, had to meet that challenge, because it had to be a poison in order to be effective in that old school. And the body had to meet that challenge. And in getting rid of the poison that was introduced in such large amounts, it got rid of the poisons that it hadn't been able before to throw off. You see, it was as though you had come in and a person was lifeless, listless, had lost all desire to make an effort, and you wanted to rouse them into making an effort to live. It was as though you go up and slap their face, throw cold water in their face, and they'd have to rouse for a moment. That's the way it affected the body. But that's all it could do. Drugs can do only those two things. That in that old school of drugs can stimulate, can depress, can whip the body into greater action, or can depress the pain by deadening the nerve endings. It can do no more. Well, if that is true, then we said, what is it that really heals? You're just rousing something then in the body that must do the work eventually. What is that? And our answer is a simple answer. It's the answer which every doctor and every surgeon will give you. They say nature does the work. The surgeon will take out the part that irritates the body, which he thinks it is unable to get rid of, but he says that nature will have to heal you. If the wound is slow in coming together, we'll have to wait for nature. What is nature? God. We don't use the term, but it's the same thing. Therefore, you're going to God, no matter what agency you use. That drastic school, that older school of allopathic medicine, gave the most powerful doses. They believed that if you're going to give it, give it. Give it strong. And then Hahnemann came along with homeopathic medicine. He said, I believe that God power within the drug will do its work if you divide it. If you break it up into small parts, you'll release the energy in it. He had very much the same idea as we have today in atomic fission. So he divided the remedy. And he gave doses of arsenic, for instance, divided to 1,000 parts. And he got results. And then Dr. Still came, and he said, I don't believe you have to give anything to stimulate the body from the inside. I don't believe you have to give it any drugs at all. I believe if you can relax the muscles and stimulate the nerves by adjusting along the spine, that you'll get the same stimulation, and the same recuperative intelligence within the body will respond, and you'll get a healing. And there were healings, magnificent healings. In the beginning of my work in medicine, I had a chance to see and know Dr. Still. Heard him talk about people, women who had past tumors, large fibroid tumors, under the stimulation of the osteopathic adjustment. Marvelous things that were done, because that man had tremendous faith. Then the chiropractors came along, and they modified Dr. Still's method. Instead of massaging the muscles, manipulating so much, they just adjusted the spine. They got results. Then Bernard McFadden came, and he said, I don't think you have to touch the body at all. I think if you just exercise it, if you get people to use it, to release it, that the exercise will stimulate, and you'll get results. And you see, in each case, the one who started the movement had to have great faith. They had to have a great vision. They had to believe the thing, and they had to get other people to believe it, enough to try it. And as they tried it and got results, and it spread from one to another, others believed. Now we're doing, beloved, in spiritual therapy, is coming to the conclusion that that healing power is the love of God, the life of God, the light of God, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world, whether the world knows it or not, whether he knows it or not. It's there. It's latent in every individual. Every individual has access to it, all that can possibly need. And instead of going through the agency, we just go directly. It takes a little more faith. You must be able to see it a little more clearly. But it is not too difficult. Some of our friends, when we started, said, well, what are you going to do with all the germs? Oh, we said, we're not going to have anything to do with them. We'll leave them to you. Oh, they said, you can't dismiss them like that. You know germs exist. We said, oh, yes, surely, perfectly well. Well, don't you believe that germs cause these diseases? Well, we know that they have something to do with it, but we don't believe that they're the ultimate cause. If they were, then when we had an epidemic, everyone would have the epidemic. There would be no such thing as resistance. Even back in the Dark Ages, when they had the Black Plague, and thousands and hundreds of thousands went down, not all the people had it, and not all those who had it died with it. There is a quality there known as immunity. No one knows what that resistance is. None of the doctors can explain it. No scientist can tell you. They have theories. They say it's because you're well cared for, you're well fed, you're well housed, you're warm, you're comfortable, you're happy. All those things. But still they don't know exactly why. We all recognize the fact that if you don't have enough to eat, your resistance goes down. If that which you have to eat lacks minerals and vitamins and the vital needs of the body, it will suffer for that lack. We all know that if you're exposed to cold or heat or to extremes of either, you work long hours with great fatigue of the body. We know all these things have an effect upon that resistance. But But the germ itself can't come in until the body resistance is lowered enough so that it can get an entrance. The normal body has germs always within it. The germs are always with us. They're like the poor. There are germs in your skin now. There are germs in your lungs. We all have tubercular germs, streptococci, staphylococci. All these cockeyed cusses, as one of my students once said when we were in medical school. I had been talking for days about all these germs, and I asked him a question. He said it was one of those cockeyed cusses that I've been telling about, but he didn't know which one. They're always around. They're like those little gnats and flies that come when the food lie out. You wonder where the hell can they come from? But you just leave the food out for a few hours. It's warm, and they're there. The germs are always there in food that is left open and warm because their habitat is everywhere. But they never make their entrance until the conditions are right. And so you recognize that the germs are the accessories after the fact. The fact is the lowered resistance of the body. How then can you keep up your resistance? How can you be sure that you are free from infection and will be free? That the germs have no terror for you? Well, first of all, by being kind to your body. Rest it. Give it the rest that it needs. I know that there's nothing that helps us so much as rest. Nothing helps the disposition so much as rest. My Wally and I have perfect harmony most of the time, but when we ride too long, when we travel too many 100 miles, and the body becomes fatigued, and we're tense and tight, and we want to get in, and we miss the worry or miss the siren, it's so easy to begin to pick and to say, you did it. You didn't see it. Or why didn't you? We've learned that. And we know that it isn't because of anything within us. It is because we're too tired. So we avoid being tired as much as we possibly can and find out life is a lot sweeter. Why do we have to do all the things that everybody does? Why do we have to go to everything, read everything, see everything? Great heavens, you can't do it, anyway. So why try? Why not just stop every now and then and be still? Oh, it's so valuable to learn this, particularly with children. Have your children stop, let go, be quiet. In some homes, there is no such thing as quiet. I know because we've stayed in some of them. And when we take children like that who are restless and highly keyed, they're hard to control, hard to manage. We had with us in Marybrook one summer a remarkable woman. She was a Quaker, a teacher. Her name was Martha Ryder. She told us how she taught her little ones to relax. She had them fold their hands before them on the desk and bow their little heads. They could open their books if they wished, and they could read if they wanted to, or they could close their books. But she had them be still several minutes, and she'd do it several times a day, whenever they seemed to be restless and thinking of something mischievous to do. She knew that they were too highly keyed, and she told them, open your books now, close your hands, bow your heads, close your eyes, relax. She said, unfortunately in America, we teachers can't talk to children about God. Well, I'm not talking about Russia, no, I'm talking about America. But she said, there is no law against the child telling the teacher about God. So after they close their eyes and fold their hands and be still, she let them tell her what God said to them. Amazing things that those children would receive. Interesting. And they really did hear things. And they got so they loved that time. It meant a great deal to them. Because you see, within it, they found their equilibrium. They found their true selves, and they could be sweet again. And then she went on to tell us that in this school which she had, this room, they sent all of the problem children. They sent the children coming from broken homes, children who had not had security, had not known love, and most of them had some form of spasmodic disturbance within their body, either periodic headaches or spasms like asthma, heart attacks, indigestion, and many of them had epilepsy. And she soon found that she could tell with those children when they were going to have an epileptic seizure, because she could feel the tension mounting in, and she could tell by little mannerisms, by their very facial expression, they were getting too tight. The tension was mounting within them, and they couldn't meet it. And it was beginning to tie them up and make the body tense. And the spasm was bound to come in order to release that tension, because the body couldn't carry any more. And so she felt if I could just help them let go, I could spare them the spasm. And when she felt a child like that in her room, she asked the other children to bow their heads and go into their quiet time. That was to keep them from looking, so no one would see. And after they were all still, she'd walk down the aisle and stand beside the little one whose tension was getting so great. She said, I don't always touch them. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I kneel by them. Sometimes I take them in my arms. But often I just stand close to them. And I transfer to that child the tranquility of my own spirit. And the tension goes out. I feel the tension letting down. They get more quiet. They get still. And they bow their little heads. And the spasm is averted. And she told us this astonishing thing, that if she had that child with her for a month or 6 weeks, until they could become perfectly accustomed to the method of relaxation which she could teach them, and she taught it without saying it, that they would never have another spasm at home or in school. And she told us of any number of children through the years. I think she's been working there since 36, that never a child has had a spasm who has been in her room. Think of it, with epilepsy. And I said, oh, Martha, that's a marvelous thing, but how do you comfort it at home at night? You see, I'm one of those Thomases. Always I have to know to the last paragraph, the last sentence. I believed her, but I wanted to understand how. How could that happen at home, in bed, at night? Because I know, you know, with these little epileptic children, how they dread the spasm, how they waken out of a sound sleep with that terror that comes over them when they know the tension is there. How do you account for that? She said, oh, they tell me about that. They tell me that when it comes in the night and they waken like that, they draw close over to the edge of the bed, just as far as they can get, and they feel me standing there. And they touch me. And they get the same feeling of tranquility that I get them in the schoolroom. And they know they're safe. And they relax, and there's no spasm. Oh, it's beautiful. That's a beautiful technique because it's perfect. Another woman whom we met who had 4 little children, and the mothers around her said to us, how do you account for it? That she never has to take her children to have shots. She never has to have a checkup. She never gives them anything. Never particularly regulates their diets. And she has 4 of them, and they're active, they're full of life. They never had any serious diseases. They're never critically ill. How do you account for it? I said, I don't know. Take us to her. We need to meet that woman. We want to talk to her. And we asked her what she did. She said, I don't know. I can't tell you exactly. I don't do anything that I know. Then we recognized that here was a woman who was using something of which she was unaware. But she knew it would work. So we gave her a specific case. Suppose your little fellow 4 years old, 6 years old, came home or didn't want to go to school, the 6-year-old, in the morning. We showed every sign of being a little out of order, a little temperature maybe, didn't want to eat his breakfast. Or he came home from school crying, something disturbed him. What would you do with him? Well, she knew how to answer that. She knew exactly what she would do. First of all, she would call off everything she had arranged for during the day. She said, my friends all know that I'm apt to call off any time. And so I can't come to the luncheon, I can't do this or that, because Bobby or Jane or one of the children need me. And I drop everything, and I go where that child wants to go. If they want to stay outdoors, I stay outdoors with them. If they want to go in the bedroom, I go in there. If they want to go to bed, I help them get in bed. Or let me play in the bed. But I'll take my sewing, my darning, my knitting, and stay close to that child all day and never leave them. I said, is that all you do? Well, she said, I just make them feel that I love them. I just love them. That's all she did. You see, that's all there is, really. And the next morning they'd get up and go to school perfectly well. She assured them of her love. She made them secure. They felt perfectly contented. They could relax. They could let go. Isn't that all we do? As you come here for ministry, we lay the hands upon you in love. Those who come and assist us touch you in love. We're assuring you that God loves you. That love which we feel is God's love translated. And isn't that assurance all that we need? Suppose all of us were sure every moment that God loved us and cared for us, and that he was able to do anything that we needed. Would we need any more than that? Of course not. And we went out one time in St. Louis to see a young banker friend of ours. He taught us a great lesson in this. He was a chap who was very ambitious. He wanted to make money. He wanted to make a name for himself. His father had been a great banker before him. He wanted to walk in his father's footsteps. He had a delightful wife. Laura Lee was a very unusual girl. She knew all this somehow intuitively. She must always have known it, because she never seemed to have learned it anywhere. She believed, she had great faith. She went always directly to the great physician for any of her needs, or those of her children. But Toad, the nickname that we had given him, Toad didn't have very much truck with all this religious stuff. It was all right for Lolly and the kids, but he was in a man's business. He didn't want to be bothered about all this stuff. But about 3 or 4 times a year, he'd get so wound up with all his business that he'd come down with a sick spell. He'd have a bad cold, a bad sinus case, a bad bronchial congestion. Something would happen to him. And he'd be out several days. And we had one of these, a virus infection. And he was pretty sick. His temperature went up to 104. They called the homeopathic doctor just because he insisted. He came in, gave him some pills. Larley gave them to him faithfully through the afternoon and through the night, but by morning he was no better. Fever still raging, aching and miserable. And she said, now what do you want me to do? Shall I call the doctor back again? Shall I get another doctor? Or shall I call Wally and Rebecca? Well, you see, he was on the spot. He had to think a minute. He wasn't going to stick his neck out too far. He wasn't going to say that he believed in Wally and Rebecca. But he said, I haven't come out for a little visit. we went out for his visit. And Wally sat by the side of the bed and put his hands on those aching limbs, that hot, miserable body. And I sat on the other side of the bed and tried to tell him as simply as I could what it was we believed. And when I got through, he turned to me with his wonderful grin. He had a wonderful sense of humor. He said, "Rebecca, the way you tell it, it sounds so simple, so easy. Why doesn't everybody do it?" I said, "That's a good question. It's an awfully smart question. Why doesn't everybody do it?" And I said, "Someone asked me that in a prayer group not long ago, and I had to ask quickly for an answer because I didn't know what to say. I used the method of our dear friend Rufus Mosley. I just lifted my head and said, 'Jesus, give me the answer quick. I don't know what to say.' And what I heard myself saying in reply was this: if you had some friends who'd come in to visit you, you wanted to play a little game, you say to one after the other, 'Oh, don't come and stand up here in front of me with your back to me. I'm a big, strong, husky fellow. I'm strong enough to hold you. Just fall backward in my arms. You're standing with your back to me. Now all you have to do is let go and fall backward. And I'll put my arms under your armpits and won't let you down. Nothing will happen to you. It can't hurt you. Come on now, just stand up here in front of me and fall back.' You try that on tour with your friends. There's one of them can do it the first time. Now, can you find anything more simple than that? Well, he didn't say anything for quite a long while. But we could see that the restlessness was going down. We could tell that the fever was leaving. He was beginning to go all more quiet. And he was thinking hard. And finally he turned back on the pillow with that wonderful grin again. And he said, "Rebecca, it depends a whole lot on who does the catching, doesn't it?" You see, he knew. You don't have to profess these religious beliefs, beloved. You may work with people whom you think aren't religious at all, just because they don't take it in the way that's handed out to them. But don't let that deceive you. There may be a deep religious conviction that in their heart. Men have come to these missions who have told us afterward, "Why, if someone had brought it to me this way years ago, I'd have been a Christian all these years." It's just because you say it in a little way, in some different way, that touches something in them that opens a door and they can take it, they can receive it. Well, that boy knew. And he knew that everything depended upon who did the catching. I said, "That's a wonderful sentence, dude. I'm going to borrow that. I'm going to steal it." By that time, he was quiet. We said, "We're going on our way." We told Laura Lee, his wife, we'll be back in an hour, see that everything is all right before we go home. We then made our other call. We came back to the door. She met us. She said, "Step inside. I want to have you feel something." And she had in her hand his pajama coat, soaking wet with perspiration. She said, "Just feel it." She said, "He just soaked the bed. And I had to change the sheets and put him in a dry bed and dry night clothes, and he's sleeping like a baby." You see, he did know who did the catching. And he let go. He just let God take him. He just gave himself, threw himself back upon that magnificent power as a swimmer throws himself back upon the water. And in that complete relaxation, the body found its equilibrium. As soon as you're relaxed, as soon as the tension lets go, if you have no fear, why, you can conquer a fever, an acute infection, any of these acute conditions in the twinkling of an eye. This is the thing which it seems is very difficult for some people to understand. They come to us sometimes at Marybrook. A young man came one time. He didn't have much faith. He had read very little. He had no chance to know about these things. And he was perfectly honest and sincere when he looked us in the face and said, "Roland and Rebecca, what would you do if anybody got really sick up here?" He didn't mean to be slighting, to be facetious. He was deadly earnest. He was thinking of a virus X, or an acute appendicitis, an acute indigestion, How would you meet it? He thought, of course, that perhaps we'd have to fall back upon the drug to help us. Now, he didn't know. And we didn't know in the beginning. And hundreds of thousands of people don't know that the acute condition is far more amenable to the power of prayer than the chronic. We don't have the acute conditions unless we go to the hospitals, unless we visit a home. Very seldom now that we have an opportunity to touch an acute infection or relieve an acute pain. Most of it are the chronics, the conditions that people have had for the last 15, 20, 40 years. You bring us people here who have been sick for as long as they can remember almost. And that takes a great deal of faith to lift the belief from the subconscious mind of a person who has carried an illness for 25 years. It takes a great deal of faith, more than you can possibly realize. For Dick Watson, who's been told from the time he could remember that he'd never walk again, that there's just no use in thinking about it. You're paralyzed. The nerves are dead. The cells are dead. That's what they're told. Oh, beloved, when will the time come when we will learn to use the constructive language? When we leave negation behind us and learn to speak in terms of life and confidence and faith, the positive words of hope. Science will bring us this because science knows the value of those words. Science does not deal in negation. Science says it is possible if we keep on, if we work hard enough, if we leave nothing unturned, we can find it. Do you think for one moment that Edison would have discovered that electric light if he'd stopped at the first failures? How many hundreds of failures he had that would have staggered the average person. But he didn't stop. Why? Because he knew. He knew if he set the conditions right that the law would have to work. Now, Tick knows that today. He's replacing the old beliefs with the new belief. His subconscious mind has been steeped in the negative. Now we're bringing him day after day the positive note. You can. You will. It is possible. The cells are not dead. The body lives. They are not dormant. They're but sleep. And Jesus is calling them to life. And just see how they've responded to that life. 3.5 inches that he's gained in actual height. I said 3 inches at Springfield, Massachusetts. The other night they called out to me from the audience, 3.5 inches. You see, that half inch means so much. And Laubach, he called us in with Margaret at noon in our noon meditation. And he said, I'm going to take off the braces and take off my shoes. And I will show you something. So we haven't told you because we wanted to be sure. But we've known it for several days. When he'd taken off his shoes and stockings, he wiggled his big toe. The first time in all these years there's been any movement. That's life. That's God in that big toe. He is seeing God in the flesh. He is making subjective the faith that most of us have only as an objective thing, only as a source of possible comfort, only as a kind of wishful thinking, sending out pious hopes in the air, hoping that God will hear, and if he hears, he may answer. That's the kind of praying that many people do. They never think of such a thing as asking for something specific. Even the ministers of the cross will tell us, we don't think you should do that. We don't think you should ask. But beloved, why pray? Why pray at all if it's just a matter of chance that God is going to hear? Why pray at all if you believe in the first place that you're not worthy? If you believe in the second place that God won't hear you, or if he hears you, he won't answer. Why pray at all if you don't believe that it's God's will that you have everything for the enjoyment of life? If it is his will to punish you, to make you suffer, to deprive you, then you're believing in the God of the Old Testament. You're not believing in the God of Jesus Christ. Because the God of Jesus Christ was a loving Father. There was never a word about punishment. There was never a word about whether you were worthy. He never hesitated to heal. Isn't it strange that we never say and never intimate that Jesus Christ would hesitate to heal anyone? But when we say God, we say it may not be God's will. Now why is that? God's will operated through Jesus Christ. He was using that will. Where is that discrepancy? What is it that causes us to do that? I believe that that has come because of too much theology. We've become too involved in arguments and questions and differences. If we just go back to Jesus Christ and take what he told us and do what he did and believe as he believed, I don't think we'd ever ask that question again. I don't think it'd ever enter in the minds of anyone that it could possibly be God's will to send anything. But then they say to me, why did my little child die? Why did I lose my sweet baby? Why did I lose my husband, my wonderful husband, my wonderful wife? Why was the friend taken? We don't know. We don't know why. There are many questions we can't answer today. But we know that the reason why was not the divine will. We know that. It may be that there was not the will to live in that loved one. It may be that in that child there was a need that was too great. We saw a little one, a beautiful child, who was taken not long ago, and many of us, thousands of us, questioned, why? When we studied, we asked that question. And we realized that that child had a deep, deep, old nature, an old soul. That the things of this earth were trying to that child. She saw many things that hurt her, that other children would not even have registered. And she thought that life was pretty difficult. She wanted to do certain things. She wanted to help. I don't believe personally that the channel was given to her through those around her to help. And I believe that her will to live faded. And that there was a reason there. There are reasons with other lives, with other children. The story that we tell of little Jack. His name is Johnny. We call him Johnny in the book, but his grandmother, who loved him so much, called him Jack. Johnny's mother was one of the most undemonstrative, one of the coldest, most snobbish women I've ever known. She did everything for her children. She had 3. Jack was the youngest. She did everything for those children that the pediatrician told her. She followed every formula to the letter. Everything was done exactly and precisely. But there was never a gesture of affection and love. And this 3rd child, the other 2 survived it, but this 3rd one was delicate, sensitive, very affectionate, and he starved for that love. When he was just, before he went to school, he began having terrible headaches and vomiting spells. And then grandmother called us and said, what shall we do? We said, we'll pray, but it sounds very much like a pressure, probably pressure on the brain, maybe a tumor. But we must work fast. Before we could organize our prayer, they took him to the hospital. A very famous surgeon opened the head. He tree-fined, he went into the back of the skull, and he found extensive cancer across the base of the brain. He couldn't touch it, didn't dare to remove it or try to. He sewed up the wound not too well. He said that Jack wouldn't possibly live for 24 hours. Now we knew, the moment she called and said what they'd found, we said the need for that child is an avenue of affection, of love. He has been starved for love. The body is frustrated. For this is what we have found, beloved, about cancer. The cancer cells are made up of cells of the little living embryo. Cancer cells are not adult cells. They never occur in the grown-up body. You find them only in the little child as it grows in the mother's womb. And they start from the youngest kind of cells, which are the round ones, the first living protoplasm. Those round cells that multiply so fast that the figures are beyond our comprehension. That round cell sarcoma is the fastest growing type of cancer. We call it a round cell sarcoma because it's made up of those little embryological cells. As they grow up, they become cylindrical, and then we get the next type of cancer, the carcinoma, a little slower growing growth. But both of these, you see, are an attempt on the part of the body to build a new body. Now, why, we asked, why would an adult body already formed and functioning attempt to build a new body? What stimulus would cause it to do that? And we began to search for causes. And one of them was frustration, defeat, lack of demonstrative love, unfulfilled love life, even the sex life, the parenthood, all these functions that are older than all civilization. If these are not met, then there may be a feeling in the body that something is incomplete, and there's a building of another body, an attempt. With Jack, we knew it was because we hadn't had love. And so we prayed for a channel of love. And oh, how that prayer was answered. Oh, how miraculously it was answered. For a woman came there to take care of him that night when the day nurse went off duty. A woman who had a little child of her own whom she hadn't seen for weeks and weeks. Because she had been left alone, her mother had to keep the baby. She nursed to make the living. She was so starved for her little one that when they let her into the room with Jack, and told her that no one would be allowed to come in because he wasn't expected to live until morning. She knew no one would see her, no one would know what she did. She took a light blanket, wrapped it around his little form, drew her chair by the window and sat down with him in her lap, and pretended that he was her little girl. And she crooned over him and sang over him and kissed him and fondled him, and loved him with an extravagant love that could come out only of a starved heart like hers. She sat there until after midnight, and then something changed in his body. She was frightened. Before he'd been a heavy, dead weight, and now the body was growing lighter. Was it death or life? She didn't know. She'd heard older nurses tell her of miracles that had happened, of healing, but she didn't know. And she hadn't prayed. She just loved. But she took him gently and laid him on the bed, and he rolled over on his side and went into a natural sleep. She drew her chair to the edge of the bed and held his hand, his arm, until dawn came and the light came through the window. And then he wakened, and she realized that he was blind, that he couldn't speak, and relaxed. And yet he made the motion with his mouth that he was hungry. And she went out and got warm milk, brought the feeding tube, and he drank. He did not vomit. He went back to sleep. As she told it to us afterward, you could realize what a marvelous thing had happened to that woman as she saw this miracle under her hands. She went home with him. She stayed with him for months at the grandmother's expense until the father took up the same place that the nurse had held and began to give Jack the love that he needed, that he craved. And the father began to work with him, to massage him, to manipulate his little limbs, to play with him. His sight came back slowly. The place on his head that had been opened was unsightly. They had to graft skin and close it again. The surgeon who had operated, when I asked him, he said, it's just one of those things. But Jack lives. He learned to walk again. He can speak. His body's well. The cancer growth stopped. It stopped like that, just the moment the need of the body was fulfilled. Now that case is on record. It's in the Deaconess Hospital in St. Louis, and anyone may look at it and see it. We had prayed after Alice Newton's healing that we would see another healing, equally as marvelous, instantaneous, complete, with no agency except prayer. Because, you see, we had no record in Alice Newton's case. We had no hospital record to back us. Here we have. And since then, we have seen one case after another. Not all, no, not by far. But the dear woman in Bridgeport, Connecticut, whom we called up out to see the other day, we saw last May and gave ministry, with a huge cauliflower cancer of the breast. She had refused operation, refused X-ray, with absolute faith that God would heal her. As we laid our hands on her in that home last May, in the attendance of a doctor of medicine who was a great believer, we felt that we had power enough there that anything could be healed. Ordinarily, as a physician, I wouldn't have given that woman much more than 2 weeks to live, at the very most. When we came through the other day, we found she'd been sitting up eating her meals. The growth is still there, but it has stopped growing. It's flattening out. It's becoming shallow. It will heal from the bottom. Roger Young, who we saw as we visited in Newark just before we came here, is the man whom I tell about in the last part of Every Man's Goal, in the chapter on tumors and cancers, who had the cancer of the tongue operated upon and then radium seed planted. It has taken a great deal of tissue from his throat. We saw him too, a year ago this past May, filled with a panic of fear because the growth had returned, and the doctor said that's all we can do. We've gone just as far as we dare to go. There's nothing else. And oh, beloved, as I've told you before, when you come to that place where they can't do anything more, then you have your grand opportunity. That is God's opportunity if He'll give it to him. And Roger Young gave it to him and came for ministry, and the fear left him. The confidence returned. He gave himself completely to God. We saw him the other day, perfectly healed, even to the radium burns. The doctors themselves, in amazement, taking him to the clinic to show the students that a cancer can be healed, but not giving God the credit. He does. Oh, there is something, there is a power here, so beyond anything that we have any comprehension of. We have no way of telling you. It's something that you just have to feel. Somehow, some way, the conviction has to come into you. And then the courage to give yourself to that power and to trust it. To know that it is the greatest wisdom there is. That it's the highest power there is in the universe. And that it is always working for good. It is always the power of life. It is always creative. Even if you should leave this body tomorrow, you can leave it well. You don't need to die sick. You can take it back to the Maker as he gave it to you. Because there's nothing in the law of life that says that the protoplasm, the living protoplasm, would ever die if it could live under perfectly normal conditions all the time. Dr. Alexis Carrel proved that the living protoplasm in itself knows no death. It is what we do to it. It is what we force upon it through our belief and our feeling. But in itself, it knows only life. Someday we shall come to that last step which the Master told us would be overcome as he overcame it. Sin, sickness, and death. He overcame the first two. He went into death and returned. He brought back those who were dead, showing that there was life. We have not reached it, but we can. And with the help of God we shall. In the name of Jesus Christ.